So you can raise your hand anytime. I'll try to check your questions on the chats and answer your question, but don't forget to mute your microphone if you don't speak. And I start by sharing my screen. One sec. Oops. Can you see my screen? I think I added Diana and Anna to the mailing list. They should have received the mail by now. Maybe you can ask them to check in their spam box, because like we send like emails in bulks and sometimes it might be mistaken for spam. Otherwise, the call is being recorded, so they'll be able to join, and I'll check if I have their email in my database, but I think it's okay. Thanks. Okay, I'll check that with you later. So welcome everybody to that 4th week of the Wasteless MOOC. So first of all, we're going to go over what happened last week, the analysis of the local waste context. Then we'll learn about how to frame the interview, how to make the waste mission statements, which is like make an interview about the values of the event, restaurant, or hotel you're interviewing. I introduce you on how to make a waste audit, and then we'll end up by analyzing what we're going to do next week, and we have time for some question and answers. So last week you were asked to try to analyze the local context as far as the habits of the inhabitants, as far as the facilities and the policies that you might benefit from local governments, but also from the formal and informal entrepreneur scene. So did you had trouble to understand your local context? Did you understood where the waste was going when it was collected, if it was collected? So the floor is yours. Is there anybody that succeeded in like writing a little report or understanding what's going on in his city? To get deeper. Okay, Charlotte is not done yet. Did anyone else add some difficulties or some insights they want to share?
I don't know if you guys experience the same thing as I did here in Ecuador. What we see on their website, and I'm speaking specifically of local government waste management. What they put on their website, it's so efficient, so great, so beautiful, but the reality is totally different. And sorry to vent my frustration here in this group, but it's so different, the reality from what they post on the internet. It's a bit frustrating.
I do understand.
Sorry for starting with a low point. But
no, that's perfectly great. That's why we are here for.
Yes, Javier, or Javier, I don't know. For me, it's exactly the same. Like I'm in Brazil, so I know, as I was working in this field for a long time, I know a bit how it is. But sincerely, I have the same issue as you. Like I see on the government website, they put like 14 initiatives, and I already know that only 2 or 4 are really working. The rest is just to show, you know. It's the problem of countries that are less developed on this subject. But it's interesting. I mean, we have so many things to work on, and I feel that in this kind of context and countries, you don't have a unique answer. It's not like in France. Okay, I mean, in France you have many answers as well, but like in countries where it's less developed, the context is a bit different. So I share with you this frustration, but I think it's good. There are opportunities to make it better, you know.
Yeah, that's it.
But it's interesting because even if local governments don't perform well, sometimes civil society and especially informal civil society can have more room to act. And for instance, in Cairo, in Egypt, they have recycling rates that goes up to 60%, and it's only with informal sector. While in France, for instance, we only have something like a 20% recycling rates. So at some points, local governments might not work properly as far as waste collection, waste segregation, and waste treatment are concerned. But in the end, for instance, Charlotte in Brazil, they got a recycling rate of tin cans that is higher than super developed countries like Norway.
It's 90%.
90%, wow. Because like there's a bunch of informal waste pickers that collect the tins and that sell it to earn a living. So this is why I emphasize the fact that you might work with the local governments if they provide services, but if they do not provide those services, I'm sure there's a social entrepreneur scene or informal scene that can tackle this issue. And if not, you won't be able in 2 months to create new structures, but it would be super interesting that you write comments on the week 3 module on Facebook, so that we can learn one from another, and so that we can have we can like develop new solutions at a local scale which makes sense. I wanted to share also the information that all the feedback that you're providing to us, like thank you Javier and Charlotte for putting a light on the fact that in developing countries, like local government are not necessarily reliable. It will help us also to build a better toolkit, because we hired someone that after the MOOC is over, will spend 3 months integrating all your feedback and like looking for new resources, so that we can also have a toolkit and a website that also better match the needs of people from Ecuador, Brazil, India, Cairo, and other places in the world. So we really need that kind of feedback, and there is nothing negative or about sharing what's the difficulties you're facing in your local context. I also shared on the week 3 module a little form, because if you manage to find 1, 2, 3, or maybe 10 social entrepreneurs that you think you can work with, it would be super nice from you if you can share them so that we can include them in our global database. We already have something like almost 3,000 entries as far as circular economy service suppliers. And with your help, I think we can help it grow again and again, so that other people that are working in Brazil or in Ecuador or in other country can find sustainable solutions. So it's time now to try to get an interview with the event organizer or with the restaurant or with the hotel. Most of the time, those people have very, very little time. They're overflowed with work, and they have like employees, they have like stuff that they haven't planned, and they don't have necessarily a lot of time to dedicate. So I suggest that you only take 1 hour from them, because you will need later other time slots from them. So please don't make like a 3 hours interview. It might be too long for them. So the first stuff is try to break the ice. You're not a consultant. You're a nice and beautiful person. And it's interesting that you share what you are doing, why you are following this MOOC, how you're going to learn, talk to them about the global community and how we are building a website together that will bring a solution for them later on. And try to introduce yourself and try to know more, because maybe you grew up in the same high school or stuff like that. And it's important like to have a trustful and joyful relationship, because during those 2 months, you're going to work together side by side. When you're done with that, try to allot enough time, maybe 20 minutes, so that you can understand about their values and motivation. And last but not least, take some time. I guess it would be at least half an hour to make a waste audit. That is to analyze what is the kind of waste that they generate and how much of each typology of waste they generate. You will not have the time to process all the information that they will provide to you during the interview, because you only have 1 hour, and it's good like not to write only on your computers while you're talking to them. So don't hesitate to get other contact from other employees that might have the information that is missing right now during the interview. Don't hesitate also to ask later on for maybe other documents that they might not have right now, but that they can send to you later, which will help you to consolidate all the information and build a waste typology grid. That is for framing the interview. Let's talk about the waste mission statements. It's really important to understand why they might be interested into like putting in places to implement like circular steps. There are hundreds of reasons, some good, some bad, to try to implement those measures. It might be to comply with an incoming legislation. It might be because they receive feedback from some of their employees or clients or stakeholders. Maybe they watch a super interesting movie that really changed their mind about their responsibility as far as an event organizer. And it's important to know what triggered that change, so that maybe you can watch that film too, or read this article too. And it's really important to try to link what is going to happen and the steps they're going to implement with the DNA of the structure you're working with. I just might take a little example. We did this methodology for a family-owned camping in southern France, and it turned out that by interviewing the girl that is running the camping, she told me that her grandfather, when he started the camping 50 years ago, it was his dream was to share the beauty of the landscape and to make to help urban people discover the beauty of the landscape in that region. And so that was super interesting, because this might be the key. And at that point, you link the DNA of the structure you're working with the steps you're going to implement. If the goal of the camping is to help urban citizens to discover the marvelous landscape, then it's also important, and it's in the DNA of the camping, to try to preserve those marvelous landscapes, so that other people can, in the decades to come, also enjoy a beautiful natural site without waste everywhere. So the idea is I sent on the web page of the MOOC, you have this little PowerPoint with all the questions, but don't hesitate to ask other questions that you might invent or design by yourselves. And the idea is to then write a little synthesis. It need not to be very long, a lot of pages. It can be only 1 or 2 paragraphs. And those paragraphs, it will be really helpful to communicate to your different stakeholders. For instance, in the camping, we decided to make a little, not a flyer, but like in the booklet that the people receive when they arrive at the camping. It's on the front page, and it says, this camping was like designed and created to help you enjoy beautiful natural landscape. So please play the game, segregate the waste, don't throw anything in the nature, and like compost with us. And those are the steps that we want you to take with us. And like, people will play the game if you explain the reason why. If you just set rules, it's boring. If you make people understand the grounds and the reasons of the rules, they will play the game. So you will be able to communicate that vision to your suppliers. So in that camping, we are trying to produce less waste because we want to preserve the environment. So please, suppliers, do you have more sustainable options? Maybe it's also important that you can put that in the contract. Hello, welcome new employee. You will be in charge of like welcoming the visitors of the camping. Since it's in our DNA, please beware of the fact that we have to keep the camping as beautiful and as clean as possible. So it will be one of your responsibility to tackle the waste issues. So as I said, you can communicate also to customers, and it also might be a good point for investors. What we did, for instance, we did that little exercise we analyzed the DNA of Make Sense, and when we organized the Make Sense Festival, every person who bought a ticket for the festival, while buying the ticket, they said the web page where you could buy the ticket said, we intend this event to be zero waste, so please follow the rules, and if you want to know more, please read this article. So Janine, my previous intern, she wrote a whole article that is available on the MOOC website about why it's in our DNA to make a festival that is zero waste and why it's important to play the game. Of course, according to the different audience you want to reach with that message, you will use different channels. It can be a website, it can be a flyer, it can be something that is written on the blackboard on the restaurants. It will depend, and you will build a solution later on. But it's just to pay, I just want you to pay attention that it's really important to have this little paragraph because it will follow you throughout the implementation, and it will help you later on to prioritize what are the steps that are going to be taken or not. So once you've done that little interview about the values, and that you will come home and you will have enough inputs so that you can write a little synthesis and send it so that the owner of the restaurant, hotel, or the organizer of the event can validate or correct maybe the first draft that you did. And but once you're done with the interview about the values, you can start to make the waste audits. So what is a waste audit? First of all, you have to understand what are the kind of wastes that are going to be generated.
Tino, can I just, quickly ask you a question? Will you share this presentation? Some of us were wondering if you would share this presentation.
So the presentation is downloadable and accessible and available on the MOOC website.
Cool, thank you.
Violet is making a great job at publishing all the resources we have on our MOOC website.
Okay.
And I'm just checking if there are other conversations after doing it this week. I'm working on it to restaurants. Can we access the presentation after a while? Okay, great. So waste typology. There are two ways to make a good waste typology. In the end, it will look like a grid, but first of all, like during the interview, it will look a little bit like a brainstorming. So if it's an event, for instance, what I encourage you to do is to try to first list all the people. For instance, if we are talking about a festival, try to list all the people that will come to the festival. If there are families, if there are youngsters, if the people at the festival will stay at night to sleep in tents, there might be volunteers, there might be caterers with food trucks, partners that will come to try to have some visibility, some artists, some security staff or cleaning staff maybe. And all those people will perform different actions. So the festival goers, they will buy tickets, they will queue, they will eat, they will go to the toilet, they will drink, they will smoke. And also, for instance, like the security staff, they will confiscate because some people will try to enter the festival with like glass bottle with alcohol in it. And so that will be a potential source of waste. So first of all, you try to not forget anyone, because like, for instance, in offices, a lot of people, they think about the co-worker, the people who work, but they tend to forget about the cleaning staff. And it turns out that sometimes they put a beautiful waste segregation system in the offices, but they forget to they forget to take into account the cleaning persons. And if the waste is segregated, but that the person who collects the waste is not aware of the waste segregation system, the person might end up like mixing all the segregated waste all the same, and it will be all that effort for nothing. So it's really important to try to list all the stakeholders so that you can take into account the different user journeys and how they mingle one with another and how they influence one another. Then, as I said, the second step of the brainstorming is to try to list all the actions. And last but not least, thanks to the actions that are related to the person, you will be able to list all the potential wastes. So, for instance, there will be tickets. There will be receipts if people buy their tickets during the queue. There will be some food containers, uneaten food, organic waste, packaging, tents, flyers, and so on and so forth. As I said, the fact that you listed the action will help you to list all the potential waste that haven't been necessarily thought of. For instance, when partners come to communicate, they might come with flyers. Flyers are a potential source of waste. So that's something that you might anticipate, and you might provide better solutions for the partners who comes and want to communicate about their brand. You might think about ways so that they communicate about their brands without producing waste. So try to anticipate all that stuff, and you can come up afterward with a list of waste and create categories for those waste. There is another way of listing all the categories of waste is to try to brainstorm, but according to the different places where the waste are generated. And this brainstorming methodology is specifically useful for hostels, for instance, because the waste that you might encounter in the room are not the one you will encounter in the restaurants or during the other activities. The idea afterward is to try to have that little grid that you will fill, and where you will try to list all the potential waste that might be generated during 1 week or 1 month in the restaurant or during the events. But knowing the typology of waste is not enough. You have also to prioritize according to the volume of the waste. There is a big mistake, for instance, that we did when we opened our co-working space in Make Sense, is that some well-intended people wanted us to segregate the waste papers. But that was not relevant at all, because they paid quite a lot of they dedicated quite a lot of energy to something, to a waste that is almost non-existent, because hardly anybody print at Make Sense. So it would have been more significant and relevant to focus more on, for instance, discardable packaging of people who have lunch, takeaway lunch during lunchtime. So this is why it's important to try to have an estimation of the volume of the different kind of waste that you listed beforehand. So how you can do that? But you're during the interview, so you can ask questions. It does not have to be super precise, but if someone tells you that they fill a 300-liter bin every 3 days of that specific waste, that's enough if you get an estimation of the volume. Another way to to understand the volume of waste is to do a little bit of data crunching. You can ask for invoices. For instance, if a restaurant buy 100 tin cans a week, they might end up with 100 tin cans, empty tin cans that goes into their waste. Of course, it's not 100% accurate, because people might come from cans from the outside, or they might buy in the restaurant and drink in another place. But that's still a good hint of how much waste is generated. Maybe also the waste is already being collected by a service supplier, and it is highly possible that the service supplier will charge the waste collection according to the volume or to the weight. So if you find the invoices of the service supplier, you might get some information about how much waste is being produced. And last but not least, another way to get data is to try to measure by yourself. So I once went to a restaurant when I had to do a waste audit, and they had not a single idea of how much waste they produced. So what I did is, while they were working, I tried to measure to get an estimation on, for instance, how much clients of the restaurants finish their plates. Then after, at 2 o'clock, when the lunchtime was over, I had a look at their bins, and I could analyze then how much organic waste, how much plastic waste was generated at each meal. So you can measure by yourself, and last but not least, you can have a guess. So, for instance, I did that for another festival. It was an architecture festival where people build a city out of second-hand materials. And they are mostly French youngsters in architect school. And those people, I would say that at least half of them smoke. And so I had an estimation that people like smoke something like roughly 10 cigarettes a day. There was something like 1,000 people, and it was for 3 days. So I knew that I had to collect something like 30,000 cigarette butts. And I knew, therefore, that I had to find a suitable solution for cigarette butts because it was in the middle of the forest and it was unthinkable of to leave cigarette butts everywhere. You can also find like sectorial averages. In the restaurants, for instance, I know that in France, for instance, when people eat outside, they leave approximately 20% of their meal unfinished. So 1/5 of the meal stay unfinished. People order a plate and almost never finish their plates. So those are national averages that you can resort to try to have a guess about the volume of the waste that is going to be generated. So ask about the estimation and the volume. It can be enough. Try to get data. Maybe you'll go dumpster diving to get this data. Do a little bit of data crunching. Try to get invoices and understand how you can use that data. And at least but not least, try to use common sense. The idea is not to have super precise idea of what waste they're going to generate, but mostly average or volume. Once you've done that, on the web page of the website, you can download this little grid, and not all the cells of this grid need to be filled. If you have plenty of time, you can try to fill them all, but that's not necessary. Mostly, it's important to try to list all the waste, try to group them by categories, try to list all the players that are that are related to that waste, who's going to generate it, who's going to collect it. Try to find if you're going to measure the volume, the weight, or the number of units and the time frame. And if you have more time, you can also try to imagine how much does it cost, how much it used to cost, what are the externalities of generating such waste. But that's roughly that optional, so don't pay too much attention to that. But this, like consolidating the data, you will do that when you're home, because you will not have necessarily all the information right now, and you will not have the time to do that during the interview. So you'll do that when you're home, and don't hesitate also to share also this grid with the rest of the group. If you already have a peer group that can check your work and whose work you can check, please share it with them directly. And if you have any question, of course, don't hesitate to ask me. I'm available 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. What's coming for next week? Priorities. So now you understand the value and the volume, you will be able to prioritize what are the waste that needs to be tackled first. As I said, with the example of the paper, please pay more attention to the higher volume of waste, but also pay attention to the values of the people you're working with. For instance, for another festival of like cliffhanging I organized in Burgundy, it is in their value to try to go cliffhanging is in beautiful natural sites. So it's unthinkable of, because also we do cliffhanging in a naturally protected area by the law. And if we leave the place dirty with cigarette butts, we will not have access to the climbing site the following year. So according to the value and the priorities of the mission statement you did, it's also important maybe to focus on some waste that might not be super important, that might not be super heavy, but that are super important because it can be super toxic. For instance, a restaurant whose owner is really attached to marine life, for instance, it might be relevant to tackle the disposable straw issues. Straw will not be a big volume of waste, but they can be really harmful to marine life. So it would be easier, for instance, to put in place a no straw policy for that specific restaurant if he's more attached to protecting the marine life. So next week, you'll try to prioritize. And for each kind of waste, the more important the waste, the more time you will spend on that. You will try to find the different solutions that are available to deal with that waste. So we wrote a lot of articles about different kinds of wastes: carpets, textile, food waste, organic waste, like beverages, and lots of stuff. So we are going to give you hints about what you can do. But since you analyze the local context and maybe you found a lot of local solutions that we haven't think of, that we didn't know, you might find new solutions, and it will be a pleasure for us to integrate the new solution you found in the incoming websites. So each of the websites have several like solution images, like this one about the eco cups. That's not only explain what the solution consists in, but what also are the prerequisites so that the solution works. As I said, for instance, for the eco cup, it makes ecological sense to have eco cups only if you reuse them at least 7 times. But also you will have like testimonies about who already like implemented that solution, what were the ins and outs, what are the feedback, and how much does it cost, and what are the prerequisites. For instance, if you use eco cups in a festival, it's super important also to plan the fact that you have volunteers or employees that might do the washing up, otherwise it won't work. And it's also super important to plan a deposit system. Otherwise, people will live with their cup, or otherwise people will leave their cups on the ground, and like the solution that you implemented will be an ecological and an economical nonsense. So when you understand all the conditions for the solutions to work, you will find out that sometimes you will have to turn the solution around so that it matches your local context and your local events or restaurants. And but this, you will do that and you will ask those questions next week. So are there any questions?